All right. Hello, AP Bio. We're going to talk about photosynthesis today, right now. It's the same day as I recorded all the other notes. I don't know, whatever. I'm obviously losing it. Photosynthesis is so cool, but I also hate it because, yeah, I'm super conflicted. I love plants. I think plants are great. I think they do a great job of photosynthesis. I love being able to breathe because they produce oxygen. But you know, photosynthesis also was one of the caused one of the first big extinction events, and it killed all the really cool bacteria, and it was bad in that way. But we'll come back to that. Before we can get into photosynthesis, we got to finish up the other page of this notes, which is general stuff about cellular energy and electron transport chain. So, excuse me, here we go. Energy in cells is really important because this is how we get stuff done. Overall, if you have to have more energy than you lose, otherwise the organism will die. So if there's a lot of energy loss, that's a big problem. Kind of obvious stuff, just wanted to reiterate that. Energy releasing reactions get coupled with energy requiring reactions like we talked about earlier. We'll go maybe a little bit more into ATP, but there's your gist. Life depends on order and controlled energy flow. And if that ever stops, that will also result in death. And that organisms use a sequential reaction, so meaning like they're in a sequence, like one after the other. Again, very controlled, very orderly, and that allows energy to flow in the correct directions. Outside of biological organisms, energy flows in a lot more random ways. Biological organisms require things to be much more strictly controlled. We're going to talk about one of those flows of energy with the electron transport chain, which we'll go into even more detail as we continue. Both chloroplasts and mitochondria use the electron transport chain to create energy, or not create it because you can't create it, first law of thermodynamics, to generate ATP from ADP and phosphates, and to convert energy from unusable forms to usable forms. That's a more precise way of saying that. Okay. If you're in a eukaryotic cell, this will happen inside of chloroplasts and mitochondria. Prokaryotes actually perform the same function, but just with their own cell membrane. So like just the outside of a bacteria, this reaction is happening. It's a little bit less controlled, probably a little bit less efficient, but you know, prokaryotes, they're kind of small, and sometimes you sacrifice efficiency for small size and you know, adaptability. So there you go. Okay, the general rule here is that the electron transport chain, or ETC, is called that because electrons are being moved between different protein or different enzyme complexes across a membrane. And those electrons are eventually being accepted by something. In chemistry terms, we call this oxidation. So there's something called reduction and oxidation, which has to do with like gaining and losing electrons. Oxidation is loss of electrons. There's just an acronym, oil rig. Oxidation is losing, reduction is gaining. So the system is losing an electron to an oxidative agent that takes the electron. It's called oxidation because people didn't really know about what was actually happening before we even knew that electrons were even really a thing. People recognized that oxygen was somehow involved in this process, which is why it's called oxidization, because it would, like, metals would become oxidized when oxygen was added to them, even though that's actually not 100% accurate, but it kind of works anyway. So oxygen is that terminal acceptor in mitochondria and aerobic prokaryotes. So if aerobic means with oxygen, so if you are dealing with an aerobic reaction, it's one where oxygen is involved. So there you go. In chloroplasts, it's NAD+, NADP+, which is, it's a big molecule. It's like ATP, but it's not ATP. ATP is not the only acceptor of electrons. It's not the only thing that can be used as a energy source, as like a battery for energy. But ATP is much more common, but NADP plus in chloroplasts. And other molecules in anaerobic prokaryotes. These are situations where there's no oxygen. Those receptors, those terminal acceptors, are actually found in eukaryotes as well. Lactic acid is one of those. Another one is alcohol, ethanol specifically. It's a process called fermentation, which we'll cover a little bit later. But now, that's the basics. Let's dive in a little deeper into the wonders of photosynthesis. So, from what we can tell, about 3 billion years ago, a bunch of prokaryotes, which were some cyanobacteria, first evolved this photosynthesis process. And we believe the current evidence is also pointing to the atmosphere being oxygenated by these original prokaryotes. So cyanobacteria are the reason that we have oxygen in the atmosphere. Before this, there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen is actually really toxic. Oxygen at high levels is toxic to everyone. If you breathed in pure oxygen all the time, it would just like destroy you. It would just rip electrons away from all kinds of molecules, and it would be a big, 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 big problem. Even oxygen tanks for people who have like medical conditions where they need higher concentrations of oxygen, it's still mixing it with air. It's never pure oxygen because that is bad. Not good. Oxygen bars, never pure oxygen. It would kill you. But yeah, so oxygen, you know, the result of photosynthesis was oxygen, and there was basically a giant mass extinction event where pretty much every species of bacteria, aside from these bacteria, were pretty much annihilated. It completely changed evolutionary history and is like one of the first big extinction events. There's other big extinction events, but this one was a bacterial genocide on a scale that is like incomprehensible. I had a professor in college who was a bacteriologist, and she said that this was like the worst thing that had ever happened. I know obviously it doesn't make sense because we wouldn't be alive if it didn't happen, but still, from that percentage, from that idea, you're like, oh, so many bacteria died. They could have been so cool. We don't know what they did because they're all gone 3 billion years ago. Yeah, that was kind of early in Earth's history, actually. I was thinking about it. Wow, that's really early in Earth's history because the Earth is not that many. It's like 3.8 billion years old. Oof. Life has been around a long time. Crazy. I'll double check that number, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, prokaryote photosynthesis, this version, then laid the foundation for eukaryote photosynthesis. We talked about the endosymbiotic theory last unit about how mitochondria, we are pretty sure that they were once individual like prokaryotes in and of themselves that were just engulfed and then became part of eukaryotes. That general philosophy, that general theory works for chloroplasts as well. We are pretty sure that chloroplasts were originally once prokaryotes that just kind of infected or were engulfed and became part of eukaryotic cells now. Let's see. I don't really think any animals, it's not a lot of animals that do photosynthesis. I'd say just about none. It's mostly plants and algae. And of course, plenty of bacterial species are also capable of photosynthesis. So there we go. So speaking of, we got the chloroplasts here. Let's zoom in just a bit. This is where photosynthesis actually happens. Some of you, I think we had that on that test, you could talk about chloroplasts, and some of you, like the way that you worded it was really weird. It is the site, chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis, as well as the Calvin cycle, which we'll talk about both today. So there's a lot of parts here, but basically the way you've got it is there's this outer membrane. It's a phospholipid bilayer, double bilayer. Phospholipid bilayer. That means double bilayer is very redundant. Yeah, there's other words for redundant. I always forget what they are, but yeah, redundant, repetitive. I'm blanking words. Anyway, there's two of those. So there's the outer one and the inner one. And there's a space in between them. And then you also have the thylakoids. The thylakoids are these little disc-shaped guys, and they're all stacked up, and those stacks are called grana or granum. Grana is one stack, granum is multiple. No, other way, grana is multiple, granum, it's Latin. Data is many pieces of datum. Datum is the singular, that's it. The lumen is the inside of the thylakoid. So try to think about how much of this you have to have memorized. I'm gonna go with not in super detail. I think it would be good to be familiar with these words. Like you should know that grana and thylakoid and lumen are all related to chloroplasts. You should probably, I don't think you have to really have it memorized. Like you shouldn't have to like draw this from memory. It might not be a bad idea, but we'll see. Maybe after I'll look at the progress checks and look at the test. But I think generally speaking, as long as you're kind of aware and you can talk about things, even if you don't use these technical terms, it'll be fine. Okay, so here we go. Oh, here's the page numbers again for the book for if you want to check this out. There's more diagrams and pictures. So here is what happens. We have the light-dependent reactions. This is the part where you actually have to have sunlight. So chlorophyll is pigments. They are molecules that have a color to them and that are capable of absorbing light from the sun. They specifically are absorbing like different frequencies of light. So if you remember the electromagnetic spectrum, let me pull up a quick picture of the electromagnetic spectrum for you. This is kind of important. Why not, right? All right, so the electromagnetic spectrum has to do with waves of light. Let me just pull up a quick image for you. Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, this is a good one. I like this one. Let's open this in a new tab so you can see it nicely. And my light just went out, so that's fun. Love it. So great. All right, I'll stand up in a minute and deal with that, but I'll show you this for right now. Electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, so the electromagnetic spectrum is photons, which are particle waves that don't have any mass. It's a whole thing. Physics, you know. And the wavelength determines the amount of energy, and it determines the frequency is how quickly they go, and the wavelength is how long it takes. So like here we've got energy is increasing because the frequency is increasing. Over here you got wavelength is increasing and less energy. The visible spectrum is kind of right in the middle, but visible light is essentially the same thing as X-rays or gamma rays or microwaves or radio waves or infrared light. Infrared light is heat. That's how we register that. So anyways, it's a radiation that's emitted. Chloroplasts actually absorb light in kind of the blue and let's see, does it actually tell you? Yeah, the blue and red part of the spectrum. So the reason that leaves are green, it's not because the chloroplasts themselves are green or the chlorophyll is green. It's because they absorb all of the light in that area of the spectrum, and the green is what bounces back. So I don't know if you've ever thought about this or if this has ever come up in any of your science classes or life or whatever, but this blew my mind when I was in school in physics, freshman physics. It was awesome in high school. Colors are basically whatever light molecules don't absorb. So plants aren't actually green. They just look green because that's the light that gets bounced back. They're actually like purple, like red and blue. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. So anyways, that's the light that they absorb. The green is what we get to see because that's the light that actually bounces back. Black is black because it absorbs all the light. all the colors of light and doesn't bounce much back, which is why it's black. White is the opposite. It absorbs almost nothing and bounces all of it back. And that's what your eyes actually see. There you go. Whoa. Anyway. Okay. So, this ends up being very complicated. There's a whole bunch of steps, but you don't have to know it that much. But the general gist here is that the light happens, it happens inside of these thylakoids where the chlorophyll lives. The light hits them and you end up with the cycle here. There's two different photosystems. There's photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. You would think that light hits photosystem 1 and then moves to photosystem 2, but it's not true. It actually starts at photosystem 2. And actually light hits both of them. They have slightly different colors. They absorb slightly different wavelengths of light. I should also say on that point, again, I'm getting rambly, but I got to say this while I remember. Photosynthesis for most plants, or for most molecule, photosynthesis in most organisms sort of operates on the kind of red and blue wavelengths. And if I remember correctly, photosystem 2 is more like, I think it absorbs the blue and photosystem 1 absorbs the red, but I can't remember, it could be the reverse. But in theory, you could have photosynthesis that absorbs any color of light. I was watching a documentary about like what extraterrestrial life could look like. And they were postulating like a planet, like in theory, you could have a planet where all the leaves are black because they absorb all the light. They just have enough, like so many different pigments that they absorb all the colors of light and convert all of it into energy, which I thought was kind of neat. I don't think that's necessary on Earth because we get plenty of light, but it was a planet where there wasn't a lot of light for some reason, so the plants would have to grab every little source of energy that they possibly could. Hold on, I'm going to erase the pencil marks here because it's giving me a headache. Okay, that's better. Okay, so the electrons from what's actually being absorbed here has to do with like electrons and electrons moving. So they take electrons and boost the energy of them. So these electrons kind of transfer between all of these different systems. And you're going to notice on this diagram, they mentioned the electron transport chain. So the electron transport chain does exactly what it seems like. It moves electrons and it uses the energy of those electrons moving. So basically the photosystems boost the energy of the electrons, and then the electron transport chain, the electrons lose energy as they go, and the energy that they lose is used to, that they release is used to move, to do work. And the work that they do is in the electron transport chain. And what the electron transport chain basically does is it takes the energy and moves protons, so H plus is a proton, and it moves it from outside of the thylakoid to the inside of the thylakoid. So it's working against, it's trying to create a proton gradient where there's lots and lots and lots of protons inside and much less on the outside. So it's going against the flow of equilibrium, and that's why it requires energy from these electrons to do so. Okay, so photosystem 1, the electron is also brought into photosystem 2. The more light comes in and boosts the electron energy again, and that basic same process occurs again in another version of the electron transport chain. There's a whole bunch of names for all these things. You don't need to know all the details. Like, this is like, each of these little blobs here represents an enzyme. You don't have to know the names of those enzymes. This you can just refer to as the electron transport chain. This is also the electron transport chain. They're slightly different versions of the same thing, but they basically do the trick. And the key here again is that you're creating a proton gradient inside the thylakoid. So there's lots of protons inside, much less on the outside. It also converts NADP plus to NADPH. That's the electron receptor at the very, very end of the chain. And that also is a form, it's kind of like ATP, it's another rechargeable battery that can carry energy from one location in the cell to another location for use somewhere else. Here's the big thing. The way that energy is produced in all cells, regardless of if we're talking mitochondria, if we're talking chloroplasts, if we're talking prokaryotes that don't have either of the two, doesn't matter. ATP synthase is the main generator of ATP and how energy is converted. So the electron moving across this gradient, the electron moving through the electron transport chain, all of the energy from that electron, all that energy that came from the sun, goes into creating this potential energy of the proton gradient, of the H+ gradient. That proton gradient is then used to rotate, and there's some cool videos that'll show this, to power for ATP synthase to be able to take that energy and convert ADP back into ATP. Hold on. Oh, that's the last bell. That's the last bell for today for school, I think. So that's good. This ATP synthase makes, it does exactly what it says. It's an enzyme, ACE, and it synthesizes ATP. So it basically recharges ATP and puts that energy back into it. And now ATP is ready to go around to the cell and do all the stuff that ATP needs to do, which is like pretty much everything. It's the universal, it's like a AA battery, you know, it works for everything. It's pretty great. So ATP synthase is the answer to all of those questions. How is energy produced? It's all about ATP synthase. How exactly we get that proton gradient, it's all from the electron transport chain. The exact nature of where the energy to power the electron transport chain is slightly different, but really that's the key point here. So super, super cool. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. We'll go through it. Again, I'm going to give you way more detail than you need, but I think what I just was saying was the general gist. It's good if you know about photosystems in photosynthesis. It might come up. I guess we'll find out, but there you go. Okay, so big things here. In plants, after this whole photosynthesis thing happens, that's this kind of process, the next step is the Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is how plants they convert a lot of the energy from ATP, whatever they are, you know, plants still need ATP to power different functions. So some of it goes to that. But the energy from the NADPH, which was right here, powering that up, charging that up, that energy and some of the energy from ATP is used to make carbohydrates. So that's the whole grabbing carbon dioxide from the air and converting it into like cellulose, which is what plants are mostly made of, starches, all sorts of carbohydrates. This takes place in the stroma of the cell. And this is a very, very detailed view of the whole process, but you don't have to know that. All you have to know is that you'll see that, let's see if we can find it. Starting over here, you're gonna need some carbon dioxide. 3 molecules of carbon dioxide come in. Some stuff happens, some ATP gets turned into ADP, so that means energy use to bind all those carbons together. Carbon bonds have quite a bit of energy in them, actually. Then that NADP is used also to power more stuff, and then it kind of just keeps cycling around and using some more ATP, and you get back to, you know, some more molecules of carbon dioxide being entered into the cell. And eventually those make all these delicious carbohydrate molecules that we enjoy eating. So, oh, I want to go backwards for a second. I forgot. The other thing that plants, we know what they need, right? They need carbon dioxide, they need water, and they need light. Those are the 3 things that plants need. So light, we know that obviously because it needs the light, the energy to power this reaction. Carbon dioxide is part of the Calvin cycle, but I forgot to show you the water is actually necessary right here in this first step. So the first part of the photosystem 2, part of the process is converting water into oxygen gas and hydrogen. Wait, hold on, and that oxygen gas is a byproduct, and that's what gets released into the atmosphere. So photosynthesis takes water, turns it into oxygen gas, and then Also, that's kind of helps with that whole proton pump, you know, adding some more protons into the cell. The protons won't be able to leave the cell because there's no way for them to leave except for through the ATP synthase. And the O2 is a non-polar small molecule, so it will just diffuse straight out the cell, no problem. Quick summary here, again, your thylakoids, this kind of shows it. The actual light-dependent reaction is happening inside the thylakoids. The Calvin cycle happens just in the stroma, which is like it's like the cytosol, essentially. The kind of the fluid, the cytosol of the inside of the chloroplast. Can't call it the cytosol because technically the cytosol would be outside of the cell because this is an organelle inside of a cell, but you know, same basic gist. Okay, so that's that. Hopefully that was freaking awesome and amazing because I think it is. I think it's pretty cool. Oh, there's the last bell. So there's more bells. All right. The next thing that we'll talk about is cellular respiration. So cellular respiration will be the next set of notes, and I think we're getting somewhere with all of this. So let me show you some videos that I would recommend watching that would go along very, very nicely with this video. I thought it was always, I'm delighted that you like these videos or you want to watch them, but I think these other videos are so much better. I posted the other videos here so you can see them. So again, if you go to my YouTube channel, the playlist for AP Biology, here, we'll go back a sec. Yeah, it's in my playlists. It's on the homepage. Although this one stops at photosynthesis, so I would actually go to the playlist for Unit 3, and you can view the whole thing. These are all great videos. So let's see where we are. This one here is a nice overview of photosynthesis and respiration as a whole. This is the official AP Biology photosynthesis lecture. So from College Boards, that might be worth looking at. This is Bozeman Science talking about photosynthesis. That one's quite nice. If you like Hank Green rapidly talking about this in Crash Course Biology, that can be very cool. Oh, this is a TED Ed video about the Calvin cycle. That one's kind of fun. Those are like neat animated videos. I really like them. It's also short. These two videos are both really good, detailed explanations of exactly what's happening inside of a cell, exactly what's happening inside of, like during photosynthesis. Yeah. So these are probably more detailed than you need, but if you want to really get a good visualization of what photosynthesis is like, I highly, highly recommend those. I'll remind you about those ones. So yeah, there we go. Cool beans. I'm going to stop there. I love photosynthesis. I'll also say something about this, a little note. Photosynthesis is one of the topics in biology that we have a lot of questions about it. There's still things that biologists and physicists and all sorts of physical biologists and physical chemists and all sorts of people are trying to figure out the exact details of how it works. One of the ideas for the future in terms of like energy production, you know, we have solar power right now. But our version of solar power relies on a lot of really toxic metals like cadmium and tellurium, and it's not like a nice, like they're not really like good to produce. Somehow plants are able to get tons of energy from the sun. If we eventually could learn how to do this, and instead of having a plant create this energy, if we could somehow redirect this energy, figuring out how to get photosynthesis and move that energy like more directly, it would be a breakthrough in energy production. Like it would change the world. Hydrocarbons, so carbohydrates, are the most effective way to store energy. We use batteries now that again use these different kinds of like lithium ion batteries. Use lithium, which is it's an element, it's a metal. It's actually that one right there. And other sorts of metals to make batteries, like nickel. Nickel-cadmium batteries are type NiCads, if you've ever heard of NiCads. Nickel and cadmium. Cadmium, again, being quite toxic. There is an idea of, it would be really neat if we could make batteries that are hydrocarbon batteries, that sort of essentially do the same process of plants take carbon dioxide and light and turn it into carbohydrates, and then animals and even actually plants also break these things down to get energy as well. They also have mitochondria, break those down to get energy. Like, it'd be really cool if your cell phone or like your computer or your car could be run off of carbohydrates. There's definitely issues with it, but that's a direction that would be really cool. It'd be a really amazing thing to have in the future. I think it's one of the interesting possibilities for the future of sustainable energy, along with nuclear fission as opposed to fusion. But we can talk about that another time. Ask me questions about it. I will talk to you about it all the time. So anyway, also carbon nanotubes. I could talk to you about carbon nanotubes all day, but that's a whole nother thing. So photosynthesis is super cool. I'm still a little bitter about it in the end. All those poor bacteria that all went extinct, but you know what? I like plants. I've got a ton of houseplants. So, and also I like oxygen. I'm a human. What human being? What can I say? All right. Well, we've got probably, I think, one more set of notes where we'll talk about cellular respiration and the mitochondria. See you then.